Hey buddies, Mr. Pugga here, coming at you with another Wonderlands build. Today I want to show you the updated Chaos level 35 Storm Warden build. As you guys saw at the montage at the beginning, it's as strong as ever. We still use a lot of items that we originally used, but there's some key differences that allows the build to deal even more damage. Before I forget, originally the Thunder Anima was shadow nerfed in the last hotfix, so when people tried this build last time, they said they couldn't deal as much damage as it would before. Originally, Thunder Anima had spell scaling and gun scaling at the same time, but it no longer does, but it did get a 25% damage buff recently, which kind of evens out the playing field, but it'd probably be even better if it still had that spell scaling. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of this build, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitch on the top right. You have no idea how much helps me out. And let's get into the video.
Legendary? Whoa! No way, dude!
As always, let's get into the skill tree first. Now, you guys already know how I build this skill tree, so I'm going to try to rush through it. So primarily, reload speed is a big factor on this build because Thunder Anima has a very long reload speed, so this reload speed 40% buff is really good on this particular build, as well as a few other items we have on this build to increase our reload speed, as well as getting magic bullets, because magic bullets is super powerful in the damage formula. It's separate from gun damage, thus being multiplicative to gun damage, which is very powerful. So make sure to get magic bullets every single time you're doing a gun build on spell shot. We have just warming up to increase our fire rate as we get more spell weave stacks, as well as having just 1 point in Font of Mana, mainly as filler to get down the skill tree, but it is nice to have the spell and action skill cooldown. Next we have Glass Cannon. Glass Cannon is very powerful because it allows us to constantly not have our ward full, which is very important because of a certain item that we have on our build to allow us to deal the maximum amount of damage, as well as getting a 30% spell damage increase, which kind of translates to around 14% more gun damage, which is excellent. Next we have Imbued Weapon to allow us to deal bonus elemental damage after we cast a spell. Since we're using a shock spell, we're going to deal 4% more shock damage, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it does matter in the long run for a min-maxing play, and 4% does mean a lot because it's bonus 4%, not just 4%. Say if you're doing like a million damage, 4% of that is a hefty chunk. That's a couple thousand. And then next we have High Thread Count to increase our spell weaving stacks, just to increase the overall power of the build. Next we have Spore Warden with essentially 5 out of 5 Eagle Eye to increase our gun damage, Affinity for more ability damage to help outplay the angles, Bullseye to allow us to crit more, 2 out of 3 Quiver Holding. Half of our weapons that we primarily use don't really care about magazine size, so we don't have 3 out of 3 this time. We have the Revived Pet ability, the extra fire rate and movement speed from Windrunner, Headhunter to increase our damage when we hit the critical hit spots, as well as the bread and butter of every Spore Warden build, which is Wrath of Nature, to increase our damage by a hefty amount, and as well as Play the Angles just to get some cheese damage every once in a while, as well as just being very powerful for mobbing. Next, let's go over the items that I like to use. Now, there's a couple different Thunder items that you can actually use, but the primary ones I like to recommend are the Thunder Anima. Despite it not having an enchantment, it is able to deal a lot of damage. Luckily, we did get a Primordial. We weren't so lucky on Primordials with other items, as you see in our build here, but this build is still able to perform very well, as you guys saw at the beginning. Next, we have a Skeet Prod. Now, the Skeet Prod is an excellent sniper. It shoots insanely fast for a sniper. It's more like an SMG than anything, and it reloads in like what, like half a second, which allows you to just shoot for a very long time, which is always fun. The enchantment we have on our Skeet Prod is a Barrage Spore Fuse enchantment, which allows us to deal extra damage occasionally when we hit enemies. This enchantment is one of the better enchantments in the entire game, so make sure to get this on any item that you have here. Next, I like to use the Twisted Launcher just to allow us to apply soak to boss enemies if we so wanted to preemptively apply soak. We do have another item on the build that allows us to apply soak, so most of the time I don't ever use this, but I did use it for a couple of bosses to allow me to deal extra damage at the very beginning, but they quickly applied soak again due to another item in the build. Other items you can use is a Catatombo. I'm not that great at aiming, but if you're good at aiming, Catatombo is an excellent pistol, as well as the Blue Cake for allowing you to deal hefty amounts of status effect damage, and as well as the Live Wire. Personally, I think the Thunder Anima outclasses the Live Wire in my personal opinion for mobbing. That's up to preference. Of course, if you really wanted to, you could use some pixie items, but I decided against that. But you definitely could use some of these items to allow you to deal tons of damage with this build as well. Besides that, you could also use a Automagic.exe. Now, I don't have any good shock Automagics, but if you did, it would pair really well with this build, so make sure to use that pistol because it actually is pretty strong. One of the better pistols in the entire game, maybe like top 5. And finally, I do have a Nightshade on this build. As you see here, it doesn't have the Barrage enchantment, so I'm not really using it for this build much, but it's still able to deal lots of damage. So if you have a Cryo Nightshade, of course you could use it. You could use a Cryo Nightshade on any build really, but you know, that's just an off choice if you'd like to use it. But really, we're focusing on the Thunder Anima and the Skeet Prod primarily. And next, we have a Peg Leg. Now, the Peg Leg is a very important choice on this build because it increases our reload speed by 40%. We already have 40% baseline on this build, and just using the Peg Leg allows our Thunder Anima to reload even quicker. Now, I'll show you real quick that the Thunder Anima does have a pretty long reload speed, as you see right here. That took around 3 to 2 seconds. That's pretty long wait time to start shooting again, so if you hit someone with a Peg Leg, you're going to reduce that time by almost half, which is very valuable. As well as having Echo to allow us to deal some crazy damage after we deal some damage that isn't melee, of course, which is perfect since we're not dealing melee on this build. And then next we have the enchantment on spell cast, increase gun damage by 30% for 10 seconds. Ideally, you would want a different enchantment on this melee weapon, but I don't actually have it. Instead, you would want on action skill start, increase damage dealt by 20% for 20 seconds on the Peg Leg, just because we have a bunch of different gun damage multipliers and all damage dealt is a bit more important with the numbers we're running, at least based on my calculations. So if you can get all damage dealt on action skill start enchantment on here, that'd be ideal, but I couldn't quite get it, unfortunately. And next, the 2 rings we're running. Now, I have 2 identical rings. That's because you can dupe rings very, very easily in this game by putting into your bank and then loading a save file and then just grabbing the 1 ring. So I have 2 identical rings, just like some of my other builds. But the important part is that it's a mood ring, increases our gun damage, and it has sniper crit and assault rifle crit, which allows us to, you know, deal more damage with Thunder Anima and Skeet Prod. So these just allow us to deal a pretty hefty amount of damage with those 2 items. Next, we have a Cursed Wit that, of course, is used to allow us to increase our damage by up to 2 times, which is very nice. Because we use Glass Cannon, it's very common for our ward to stay depleted for a very long time, so this is always going to be an ideal shield to pick up on not only most builds, but especially a Spell Shot build. But we have the enchantment on spell cast, increase lightning damage by 30%. Now, the only chances that you can increase your elemental damage is with on spell cast, besides action skill active, and action skill active enchantments don't exist anymore for builds that use barrage, so we have to use on spell cast, increase lightning damage by 30%, but that's fine because it allows us to deal more damage. And then here I can show you the Cape of Tides I'm running. Now, the Cape of Tides I'm running is 3 out of 3 on Wrath of Nature, which is very, very important. 3 out of 3 Wrath of Nature outclasses most class mods, so make sure to grab that. But a Cape of Tides with that is ideal because this allows us to apply soak just randomly when we hit enemies by 25% chance after we hit a crit, which is excellent. This allows us to not have to use our Twisted Launcher and thus allow us to randomly apply the soak and then deal lots and lots of damage to bosses and mobs alike. Now we have area damage on here, which allows our Thunder Anima to deal more damage because the ricocheting bullets that explode with the Thunder Anima our area damage, which allows us to deal more damage overall. And then next we have a Sacrificial Skeep of Heroism. Preferably you would want a amulet with lightning damage and spell shot, which is exactly what we have here. Lightning damage to increase our total damage, of course, but spell shot power to allow us to have more spell weave stacks, then allows us to have more magic bullet damage, which is really, really good. Sacrificial Skeep is very important on this build because the build doesn't have a lot of survivability besides killing enemies before they kill you, and the Sacrificial Skeep essentially allows you to health gate for 10 seconds straight because it's going to heal you on intervals of 2 seconds, which is excellent because that healing burst will heal you all the way to 100%, which is excellent. And then finally, we have a volatile Buffmeister. Now the Buffmeister we're running has the enchantment on Axe Skill Start, increase gun damage by 40%. We're using Barrage, so we're going to be activating Axe Skill Start very, very often, as well as having Pew and Zap. Now the reason why we're running a Pew and Zap one is because Zap increases our spell damage by 80%, thus increasing our magic bullet damage for more damage overall, as well as Pew allowing us to reload faster and shoot faster. So say I'm using the Thunder Anima, I'm going to activate this, and now I'm shooting really fast, and then you'll see me reload even faster than what you saw before, which is excellent because the name of the game is to reload fast and of course shoot fast, which is nice, as well with the Skeep Prod, which allows you to shoot like this really quickly, which is beautiful. I love it a lot. Of course, you want to have a Buffmeister with Shock to increase the total damage of shock damage on your build because we're optimizing the shock damage. Next, here's my hero points. We have maxed out on strength, maxed out on wisdom, and then midway on intelligence. The reason why we're midway on intelligence is because we want to have our Buffmeister back as quickly as possible because Barrage comes back really quickly on this build, so there's no reason to put any points onto attunement in my opinion. Max out strength because that increases our total damage by a lot due to the fact that we deal random crits in this game, thus allowing us to deal lots and lots of damage whenever that random crit occurs, as well as wisdom to allow us to apply a nasty dot on enemies occasionally, which then increases our total DPS. And the character background I chose for this character is Village Idiot, just for you to know. And then finally, here is my myth ranks. Now the myth ranks I have are at 313. So here's my Druid, here is my Archmage, here is Blade Master, and finally here is Deadeye. Now the only other thing I need to show you on this build is how it performs, or how I like to use it on a regular run. So I'm going to go into a Chaos Chamber just so you can see how the build normally performs. Now as you see on the bottom of the screen, we don't have max spell stacks at the current moment. That's when I like to use the Skeep Prod. Now the Skeep Prod is our main bossing tool, as I forgot to mention before. So I primarily do not like to use it on regular mobs because it runs out of ammo really quickly, but it is able to obliterate foes really quickly, as you saw right there. But because we don't have full spell weave stacks, what I like to use the Skeep Prod for during these situations is to shoot really quickly and reload really quickly, because then we can get spell weave stacks. But you could in theory just use another item on the build to reload quickly, but if we have an item that can do it already, why not just do it? So primarily when we're running around, we just like to shoot randomly because the Thunder Anima has those ricocheting bullets that allows us to deal large amounts of damage without us really having to aim at all, which is excellent for me because I'm not too good at aiming. Now, one thing I told you is because of the fact that it has such a long reload speed, a big thing you want to set into your rotation is after you shoot for a long time, you want to start meleeing other enemies. Now, I didn't quite get to show that, but normally what I like to do is get it to start reloading. Halfway through the reload animation, I melee. That cancels the reload, thus allowing you to get the increased reload for next time, as well as the movement speed, as well as a way to cut your reload animation by half, which is always nice. Other ways you can cut the reload animation is by using your action skill during the reload animation or your spell during the reload animation. So it's halfway through, I'm going to activate Barrage, and that cancels it, but I didn't quite get it that time. So that was a bad example. Let me see if I can't do it real quick for you guys again. So it's halfway through, I activate the Barrage, and then it cancels the reload. So that's ideally what you'd like to do since it's such a long reload animation. But due to the fact that we have other things that increases our reload, we don't necessarily need to cut it in half if you don't so wish. So I see this enemy, I'm going to peg leg him, and now I have the increased reload speed, so you'll see that it reloads in just a half a second, or maybe about a second, which is always nice. Now, because we have a lot of enchantments that activate on Axe Skill Start and Spell Cast, you want to make sure to optimize those by occasionally casting your spell and occasionally using your action skill. So primarily what I like to do is use Barrage occasionally, and then whenever I see a tough enemy, I like to use my spell, which then allows us to deal even more damage, which is always nice. Of course, since we're running Wrath of Nature, if you see a heavy enemy that has a large HP pool just like that, you want to hit them with Barrage and then start dealing lots of damage, because then you're going to get that 104% extra debuff on the enemy, which is always nice. Or should I say 108%. Next, let's go into a elite room just so you can see how the build performs. At the bottom of the screen, you can see my stacks aren't full, so I'm just going to use a Skeet Prod to get it back really quickly. And then we're going to try our best to look for some enemies. So I see some enemies over here. I'm just going to try my best to deal as much damage as possible to all the enemies around. The nice thing about the Thunder Anima is that if you don't want to aim, you could in theory just shoot anywhere, and then the build will just allow you to kill all the enemies around. So I'm just going to shoot the ground, and that enemy almost died just by doing that. But ideally, you would want to actually aim for the enemy, and then when it starts ricocheting, hit the ground, because sometimes what I've noticed is that when the ricocheting bullets happen, they don't activate when they hit the enemy sometimes. So ideally what you want to do is just start hitting the ground as soon as you see it start ricocheting. So I'm going to try my best to hit this guy, and then it's going to start ricocheting, so I'm going to start aiming at the ground, as you guys saw right there. I have a lot of fun using this build because we're able to deal lots of random damage to pretty much just any enemy that spawns, which is always nice, as well as just dealing lots of damage with a very fun gun via the Thunder Anima. I do think the Thunder Anima is one of my more favorite guns in the entire game at the current moment, just because of how fun it is, but I do wish it was enchantable, because then we could deal even more damage with the build. Imagine seeing Spore Fusion explosions as we hit all these enemies. That would be crazy. Here's a great example of the Thunder Anima, because there's going to be lots of enemies that spawn that are going to be very easy for us to take down due to the fact that it ricochets very quickly. So I'm just going to primarily kind of just stand in one place, and we're going to see all the enemies around us just die really quickly because of the ricocheting bullet action. As you saw there, we did have a badass captain spawn and then immediately die without any problem. Since there's a boss that spawned, I'm just going to activate Barrage and my Buffmeister, and we're going to kill the boss in just a few seconds, just like that. Now, I did say I primarily like to use my Skeet Prod for bossing, but just for demonstration purposes, I am going to use it against mobs just so you can see the damage of the gun. As you saw right there, it clears enemies very, very quickly without any problem. Keep in mind, right now we're in an elite room, so the enemies that we're facing are, I believe, 45. Yeah, it's level 45, which means that they get a hefty amount of damage reduction against us, but we're still able to take them down fairly quickly. Of course, as you see on the bottom right, we're almost out of ammo, which is the bad part about the Skeet Prod. This is primarily why I like to save it for bossing, because we run out of ammo so quickly. So if I continue to do this run, I'll more than likely run out of sniper ammo, which means that we can't use it until we get more sniper ammo, you know. No brainer, but that's like primarily why I like not to use it for mobbing, despite it being a beast at killing enemies. Because it's so good at killing the enemies, you want to save it for the actual hard enemies. See, I only have 14 bullets left, which means I can unfortunately not use it anymore. And as I said to Adnesium, that's the reason why I like to use the Thunder Anima for mobbing and the Skeet Prod for bossing. I have a ton of fun running this build, and I think it's one of my more favorite builds just because of the Thunder Anima alone. I know that's kind of weird to like a build just because of one certain gun, but I really do like the Thunder Anima, and it's really fun to optimize it, and I think you guys would have a lot of fun optimizing this gun as well if you run this build. If you get a chance and get a Thunder Anima, try to build this build because you deal a lot of damage with Thunder Anima, thus, at least for me, allowing you to have a lot of fun. And as always, a big shout out to the members who make these videos possible. We have Jace Noodles, Clairvoyance, Rick Iglesias, Josh Dig, 31bar70, Grey Wolf, and Wishkeeper. These are the people who support me as little as $5 a month, and you can also support me as little as $5 a month by clicking the link in the comment description or in the top right to become a member. The more members we have, the closer I get to becoming full-time, which means more videos for you guys. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I hope you all have a great day. Bye-bye.
And the last shall be first to immerse in a pass out heat, facing him up with a moxie melt till he woke up drowning in tchotchke hell. War in a cave with a torch on a wall, then a window arrangement of porcelain dolls.